Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, DarkOwl and Ascent, for our webinar entitled Executive Protection and Security in a Dangerous World, Digital Monitoring and Detection of Risks. My name is Kathy. I will be today's host. We will be recording today's session and will follow up with any additional resources via email and the recording. If you have any issues hearing the audio, please feel free to ping me privately using the Zoom chat function. Today's webinar will be held as a fireside chat with Mark Turnage, DarkOwl CEO, as our moderator. Before we begin, we'd like to give each company a moment to introduce themselves. Brandon, would you like to tell us a little about Ascent Solutions?
Absolutely. So if you've never heard of us before, we are Ascent Solutions. We're an award-winning Microsoft solutions partner that specializes in the Microsoft security stack. We offer a wide range of cybersecurity services to include advisory, professional services, as well as managed services, including cyber threat intelligence, security operations center, and threat and vulnerability management as a service, just to name a few.
Great, thank you. Mark, would you like to tell us about DarkOwl and then start our chat?
I'd love to. My name's Mark Turnage. I'm the CEO of DarkOwl and co-founder of DarkOwl. DarkOwl's a company that was established for the sole purpose of monitoring the darknet and what we call darknet adjacent networks for criminal activity and underground activity on behalf of our clients. We monitor over tens of thousands of sites a day, and they include everything from the traditional Tor network, all the way to Telegram channels where threat actors are now active. Our data is available via a number of different ways: UI, APIs, data transfers, and we number many of the world's largest cybersecurity companies as our customers. It's a pleasure to be here today with Brandon, and I'm going to just let Erin introduce herself really quickly, and then I'll start with questions.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erin. I'm the Director of Intelligence and Collections at DarkOwl, so responsible for the data that we collect as well as doing investigations on behalf of our customers.
Great. Let me go ahead and start. I'm going to direct this question first at Brandon and then at Erin. Can you give us the basics of executive protection? What is it and why is it important?
Well, at Ascent Solutions, we offer what we call digital executive protection monitoring and alerting services that succinctly tie in with our team's approach to continuous threat exposure management. Our approach to executive protection is actually rather simple. We provide enhanced monitoring of the dark web that specifically focuses on key executives and organizational leadership using scoped ad. Okay, so alerts that we recognize that alerts specifically pertaining to these individuals and key personnel could require a more tailored and, of course, timely approach with additional requirements, actions, activities, and engagement beyond just the regular security team.
Great, thank you. And Erin, why is it important to monitor specifically executives' data online?
Yeah, so I think executives tend to be, the most visible people in any company. So their information is out there. They're doing things like webinars, they're putting press releases out, etc. And so that makes them more of a target to individuals. And I think historically we've thought about, physical threats, and that's still a concern, obviously, in terms of people being targeted. But more and more we're seeing with cyber threat actors is that they're using the information that they can obtain in the digital realm in order to target those quite visible people. And they can do this in a number of ways. And this is why it's important to monitor kind of digital activities from a different perspectives, because there's information that can be leaked about executives, which can lead to information that threat actors can use. And they can, get their credentials and get access, things that way. But there's also a social engineering aspect to this. If people are putting a lot of information out there on social media about their movements, about their hobbies, about how they operate, that makes it a lot easier for threat actors to impersonate them or use them to target members of the company. And we see that a lot with phishing attacks. So I think it's really important to understand, especially for executives, but probably for all employees and individuals, what information is out there about you and what steps can you take to protect your digital footprint.
And I'm going to go off script here, so I'm going to cause our hostess Kathy to have a heart attack. I have heard through the years and have seen it. We've seen a little bit of it ourselves, that oftentimes not only are executives the most visible, members of a company, but also they're the least cautious. It's the C-suite. It's the sort of have you guys found that to be the case in some cases? I don't want you to badmouth your clients or our clients, but do you find that to be the case?
I'd say it definitely depends on the executive when it comes to that. But I'd say that there's some consistency with that, Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say anecdotally that does seem to happen, but I feel like maybe it makes bigger splash
Yeah.
when it's the C-suite that's messed up. But people, I think as well, like it could be, a generational thing as well. C-suite tend to be older, they tend to be less tech savvy. They tend to not think about social engineering attacks or how the information that they're providing could be used. But then in the same, vein, younger people put way too much information on social media, in my opinion. So it's a balance.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been subject to phishing attacks myself, some of them quite sophisticated.
Yep.
And all of the most sophisticated ones tried to take advantage of the fact that I was the CEO. They had a message or a sender that I would pay attention to. They were quite sophisticated. So
yeah, would love to add to this one too, big time. Multiple vendors throughout 2024 identified that threat actors are increasingly targeting executives, basically to get a foothold into their organization, causing reputational damage, et cetera, or just picking insidious activity. Yeah. This is also actually quite consistent with what we've, what we have mentioned about what we've seen in our SOC. We have to keep in mind that executives often have access to the organization's most critical business functions that threat actors can abuse to gain the foothold. We don't exactly, to Aaron's point, make it very hard either. We feature our executives. In some cases, we feature the direct contact information for these folks and stuff out there as well. So putting it all together, we basically roll out a red carpet, for these folks and stuff to attack our most senior folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's where you have to think about the senior folks being impersonated as well. So, employees are much more likely to respond to a phishing email if they think that it's coming directly from an executive. And, with things like AI now, you can generate an executive's voice. If an executive is out there, doing a lot of press webinars, like their voices on the internet, you can impersonate that and use that against their employees. So there's those aspects of it as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're going to come on to that. And the question I had for you, Brandon, was what is it about now? What's different about now that makes monitoring this type of data more important than ever?
Well, I think, threat actors are getting more creative every day, and we're seeing them attack and exploit, things that are, often on the periphery, especially since, throughout 2024, we watched a lot of different vendors and stuff, third-party vendors and stuff that have access into different environments get hit, and whatnot. So I do think that, most of the time when we get dark web monitoring and alerting services, it's specifically monitoring your email domain, but we need to open up the aperture on that. In my opinion, we need to be monitoring the organizational and any mentions of the organization, obviously email domains and credentials, but specifically with executives. Sometimes a lot of these executives link some of their, non-business, email addresses or contact information to their business email contact, information as well. So with that, we got to be mindful of threat actors exploiting, these fringe and these periphery things and stuff to get access. Their goal remains the same, cause as much damage, get access, sell access, etc. We got to be cognizant of that.
And Aaron, what's different about the dark web as opposed to more social media sites? Give us some sense of that difference.
Yeah, I think people on the dark web have a bit more of a sense of they can do whatever they want. So, we see things like doxing, where threat actors will just provide information about individuals, and it will basically be a dossier of that individual, all the information that they can find about them. We don't tend to see that shared as much on things like social media. And also, just the sheer breadth of kind of leak and stolen data and stealer logs is something that we're seeing, a huge surgeon, and the dark web is where they, buy and sell that information. And I think everyone needs to be cognizant of this. You can be as careful as you want about your digital data and your footprint, but you don't have any control over the third parties that you're putting your information into. And if they get breached, your information is out there. So, you can be pretty savvy. You can, have limited social media profiles. You can, have all the privacy settings, etc. But, if you have MyFitnessPal and MyFitnessPal gets leaked, your information is out there. That's on the dark web. So I think it's very important to be aware of that. And then, kind of moving to some of the dark web adjacent sites that we monitor as well, things like Telegram and Discord. We see a lot of individuals talking about targeting or talking about, accessing particular companies or, just geopolitical events that are affecting their lives and, are hitting on organizations and companies. So I think just monitoring that rhetoric as well, stepping slightly away from specific executive protection, but just kind of general organizational protection, and reputational risk. There are a lot of individuals out there that are making anti-Semitic comments, making violent comments, making threats against executives and against organizations. And I will say social media has probably, changed slightly in the last year or so, where some people feel that they can do that on the open web as much as they can on the dark web. But it's certainly something we've seen in the dark web, over the last few years increasing.
Okay. And Brandon, give us some examples of some of the threats and risks that you guys have found, and maybe talk about a unique case, that you've come across.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most commonly we see stolen credentials, data breaches, ransomware posts, threat actors discussing sharing proofs of concepts, or just the sale of weaponized exploit code targeting specifically vulnerabilities, amongst many other different nefarious things. So, we got a couple of, I think the most consistent one that we see, I would say more than often, is, our customers ask us, well, why are my executives and my leadership, the most phish? Well, it's like, well, look at your website, man. You got the contact information right up there. Or, it's something as like your boss keeps signing up for all these random newsletters, that continue to get hit, with his business email, which is why he's on X amount of different data breaches, that's the most common, the most consistent. But I think the most bizarre case that we ever had to respond to, we had a customer that had just moved organizations and went to an organization that recently got hit by a threat actor. And he had called us in to give him a hand and some assistance. Specifically, my part was to monitor the dark web, kind of get a good idea of what their presence really looked like on the dark web as well, which is very important for him, obviously. So built a couple of different couple of different cases, specifically watching for organizational mentions, email domains, or just anything and all things related to the victim company. And sure enough, the threat actor wanted to gloat about his ill-begotten gains, and he threw up a post detailing exactly what he had stolen from the company. At that point, took that, handed it over to the team that was investigating the situation, and it kind of gave them a better idea of where this threat actor could have been. So continuing to monitor, updating as needed, especially the posts and stuff as the thread grew on there. And I guess the threat actor made some enemies of his own kind, and they decided to dox him.
Oh my God.
After they doxed him, they basically put it out there like, this is who he is, this is where he lives, this is his home address, this is where his parents work. Here's all of his socials. These are all of his data repositories. This is where he stores his data. And they basically stripped this threat actor of all of his anonymity. And then immediately I turned that over to the team. And I would like to believe they finally adjudicated him. I haven't seen a post from him since, so could be that. Well, let's hope. So
that's that's very, very interesting. Aaron, give us a sense of what trends you're seeing in terms of threats in the current environment.
Yeah, I just want to jump onto what Brandon was saying though. Like I always find it really interesting. Like, I think we focus very much on like, let's protect our executives and our organizations, which absolutely we should be doing. But I love the fact that the data that we have in leaks and from doxing and stealer logs helps us to attribute who is actually doing this. So we can kind of use what they're using against us back against them. And it really helps to know kind of why someone's doing something and what their motivation is, because it allows you to assess the threat, a lot better. There's a difference between armchair trolls that are just making threats because they've got nothing better to do, and someone that is going to follow through on that threat. So I think it's really interesting to have that motivation. But yeah, in terms of trends, I think, we're just seeing a huge mass of data. Like it's just growing and growing. We're not seeing that diminishing in any way in terms of data leaks. I think Stealer logs, they're not new, but they definitely seem more prominent, in this sector in terms of people being able to use those, the amount of credentials that are stolen and how people can use that to access things. I think we've definitely as well seen a lot more sophisticated social engineering. I think particularly some threat actor groups in terms of targeting call centers and targeting help desks of organizations as well as the executives and CEOs and being pretty convincing based on the information that they're able to find on both the dark web and the surface web to put that out there. Brandon's already mentioned phishing as well. That's not a new trend, but phishing is not going anywhere. I think as long as your email address is out there, it's a technique that works. I mean, you look at things like Colonial Pipeline, that was, a really basic phishing and leaked credential attack that, led to the shutdown of, the Colonial Pipeline. So I think those are the things that we continue to see and that we have to continue to mitigate against. And then I guess the other thing that I've kind of already touched on that we see in terms of threats being made against executives or organizations, I feel like anecdotally people are less concerned about the threats that they're making. They're not trying to obfuscate who they are as much as they used to. I think people feel a little bit braver about what they can and can't say. And, part of that's people on the internet, they're sitting behind a screen, they think they're untouchable. But also I think it's just kind of the way things are developing geopolitically. People have, a sense that they can do things and take action. And I think, we'd be remiss in a executive protection webinar not to talk about the United Healthcare assassination. That individual, as far as we know from reports, obviously I wasn't involved in that investigation in any way, didn't have a huge amount of rhetoric online, talking about doing that. But I think it really just highlights, when people have pain points and they're talking about those pain points, you need to kind of pay attention to them. And that the digital world and the digital, things that people are talking about and the exposure that people have, he had to know that that executive was going to that hotel at that time, and that was probably from his digital footprint. So there can be real world impacts outside of, hacking and, network things that I think it's important to be aware of as well.
And can I ask you both a question? When you're monitoring executive, take me as an example, you're monitoring Mark Turnage. How often do you pay attention to Mark Turnage's spouse or partner and family? Have you seen that as an attack vector by threat actors?
I would say it's definitely an attack vector. It's again, some, executives will get education through their security, through their SOC, whoever, telling them what they should and shouldn't do, and they can improve that. Whereas, kids, might post where they're going on holiday and things like that, and it can make them more vulnerable. What I would say about that, though, is that it's really up to the organization and the executive whether they want to extend the monitoring that wide. A lot of people, for very legitimate reasons, don't want to share the more personal side of their information, their family, their personal emails, etc. I would caution against that because, you need to look at things in the whole when it's looking at this. But that does tend to be an issue is the privacy concerns around that.
Yeah, I group that with the periphery as well.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen one or two cases where as Aaron said, the social media posts of children were a primary attack vector because they could follow an executive's family around. And as Aaron said, it's a choice for the executives and the organization to make. Give me a sense, Brandon, what practical steps can be taken to baseline, an organization and then monitor it. And how have you used DarkOwl to monitor and alert to these threats?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing I learned after 20 years in the Marine Corps is collection planning is key for any different type of operation. So what we do for digital executive protection monitoring and alerting services, we have a whole menu of different things that we offer our different customers and stuff who wish to subscribe to this. So it's up to them. From there, we pump that stuff into DarkOwl to specifically monitor for those different things. And the great thing about DarkOwl is you're able to build a case and stuff where it's going to go out and fetch whatever frequency that you want it to. This is the information that you ask it to go look for on various different things. If I want to specifically look in extremist forums or just other threat actor based forums, I can have it look specifically for these different things and stuff there. Or if I just want to focus on email domains or email addresses or all that in these different forums, like, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to go do that. Most consistently, as far as our basic package goes, what we do is we monitor the organizational email domain, and the names and the business email addresses, and in some cases personal email addresses that are joined to the network environment of the different executives, and we build a case around that. So anytime something does pop up, I get a notification, and then we handle it accordingly. So
great, and those can be in relatively real time, within minutes of a post being posted. So, and Aaron, give me a sense of what mitigations companies can take to protect their executives. I mean, it sounds like there's this Wild West world where data is being spilled out there or doxed out there. What can a company or an organization really do to mitigate the risk to their executives and to the organization itself?
Yeah, so I think one is doing this kind of monitoring and being able to, baseline what is already out there, because there's no way that there isn't something out there to begin with. So you want to have that, and you want to be able to see for any changes. But basic steps that organizations can take is, giving people cybersecurity training on, phishing attempts and what to look out for. Giving people, advice on what they should and shouldn't share on social media and how they should set their privacy settings, etc. I think having a really strong password policy, leaks are going to happen, but if you're not using the same password on every account, it really reduces the risk that it has to your kind of overall footprint. I think, using things like password managers can really help with that. And then I think, being cognizant of what data is out there. There are ways to remove some of that data, not on the dark web, unfortunately. So if your data is on the dark web, your data is out there. But there are a lot of kind of data brokers and other organizations that will hoover information up from public records and from social media. And you can legally ask for that information to be removed. So that's something that you should probably look at doing as well. And I think just being generally vigilant, making sure that your employees are trained and know what to look out for, but also know what they should and shouldn't do. Like, don't post too much information on social media. Don't mix your personal and your business email addresses on accounts. Like, don't use your business account for your hotel bookings and things like that, because that's the way that threat actors can, piece together your life and do those kind of doxes that Brandon was talking about. So I think it's just having good cyber hygiene and having good education to try and mitigate and reduce the risks as much as possible. I think everyone needs to be aware that you can't remove the risk. There's steps you can take. We can do this monitoring. We can be looking out for that. We can be as vigilant as possible. That we can't protect all third parties where we've put our data. And so you just need to be very vigilant for these types of attacks.
And you must get this question all the time, Brandon. Like, what do we do about this? Can I take darknet data off the darknet? Can I take my data? No, I mean, you must get asked this all the time by your clients.
All the time. Yep. Yeah. And adding to what Aaron said, I think enacting a continuous monitoring of your executives on the dark web and integrate custom alerting into your SIM to identify and respond to potential security threats, I think that's awesome, which is why we bring that into our continuous threat exposure management. Modus operandi here at Ascent Solutions. We bring this all in together, and I think it's important having the sufficient processes in place and stuff to monitor for these specific things. DarkOwl enables a lot of that, and there's a lot of science that goes after that when these things happen, which is why I'm just very graceful to have such an awesome SOC team that I'm a part of.
And we haven't talked about this. Let me ask this question: Have you how deep in an organization is it? Have you monitored in for executive protection below the C-suite level, senior management as well, or do you tend to focus on just the C-suite?
I think it depends on the organization and where they have, determined their most critical, business functions are. So although, this person, is, a mid-level part of the organization, this person is in charge of all these different, industrial control system equipment here, and they have a public-facing presence that interfaces with the OT environment and the IoT environment. So yeah, that's definitely a high-valued individual. It depends on the organization to answer your question, but yes.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking about, system administrators, for example. They're not C-suite, but they're very, very important people in an
Mhm.
organization.
Yeah, I think it can depend on the role. Again, it depends on the organization, their size, and their appetite for this kind of thing. But, there are certain roles that you definitely need to kind of be aware of. But I think it's also, I think to Brandon's point, what public exposure those individuals have. The bigger footprint that they have out there, the more likely they are to become a target. So you might be, someone that has a really important role, but you're very discreet and, kept quite quiet and not publicly listed on the website or anything like that. And that's not to say you shouldn't monitor for them, but it's probably less risky.
I, you
Correct.
know, I've never heard of a company like ours or yours doing this, Brandon, but you might want to do a social media audit of all the employees to see who has the most social media exposure. Because I have
That,
seen,
I mean, there's a direct correlation with that, right? Like, so Mark, you were talking earlier about how you get phished all the time. And
yeah,
I know other people
yeah,
in our company have received those phishing emails. I never get them. And my hypothesis is because I'm not on LinkedIn.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you can make yourself less of a target by, protecting your digital footprint in certain ways. But yeah, like, I mean, I know anecdotally of a case going back to what you were saying of family members and like checking social media and things. They had an executive who was pretty careful and pretty secure, but their wife had uploaded a review that included, locational information. So, it's what people put out there.
Yeah, that's I have seen extremely active CISOs, system administrators, and other cybersecurity professionals very active on social media, which is an interesting tension given their roles. We've talked a little bit about use cases, but if you guys could both finish with sort of one of the most unique cases that you've seen doing using the tool, I think it'd be informative for our listeners here. Brandon?
Yeah, so I think the one that we specifically talked about with the other company, with the threat actor getting doxxed, like that was the absolute most unique case that I've ever seen, and that's definitely in the Hall of Fame, for as far as dark owl for the win moments for our company.
Yeah,
Aaron?
I'm trying to think. I don't know that I can think of something that's particularly unique, but I mean, we definitely see um, impersonations of executives on kind of Telegram and other areas, threats being made, a lot of memes being used for that kind of activity. And then I just think that the doxing thing is such an interesting kind of area of data set that we collect from. I've seen, everything from executives to FBI agents having their information released. And once that information is out there, there's very little that you can do about that, but you need to know that it's out there. So having that monitoring capability to know what of your information is out there and how you can be vulnerable. But as I said, I think turning that back, the threat actors do this themselves to each other. And so it's very helpful. I mean, there's a lot of threat actors out there that are involved in things like swatting. They'll swat executives and other kind of famous people's homes or schools or universities. And they make a kind of a game out of that. But because they're interacting with each other, they anger each other, and that causes their information to be doxed, which helps us as an investigator to find out who is doing this. And as I said, that important part of motivation, which I think, some security people, they just want to stop an incident. They just want to stop, data being stolen. But I think it's always really important to look at that motivation piece as well.
And Brandon and Aaron, do you see any trends in threats to executives that are sort of based on geopolitical events? Something happens geopolitically or politically here in the U.S., or something like this shooting, this tragic shooting of the United Healthcare CEO. Do you see risks go up or chatter go up, or is it tend to be fairly flatlined throughout?
From a geopolitical perspective, absolutely. We got to go back in time for this one a bit. But when Russia was getting sanctioned a lot by a lot of different commercial vendors and stuff, that kind of set off a red flag for a lot of the Russian based e-crime actors and stuff to start going after it and specifically targeting these companies because of the Russia-Ukrainian war and stuff. So that really prompted a lot of these folks and stuff to start going after them. So yeah, it really depends. It really depends on the situation, and what the atmospherics are surrounding that situation as well.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen, I think the most recent one off the top of my head that I can think of is the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely caused, a lot of individuals that were Jewish to be targeted, and Palestinians to be targeted. So you definitely see those trends in relation to big geopolitical events. And I think that's something that executives and organizations need to be aware of as well as, posturing around these types of events. I would say with the main trend I've seen with the United Healthcare incident was executives are more concerned. They're taking more of a, the proactive approach to maybe looking at their footprint. And I think a lot of people were very surprised by the response to that from a lot of individuals on social media, on things like Telegram, where there wasn't a lot of disgust at what the alleged assassin had done, and more concern about, we don't like these executives. There was one individual on social media who produced a deck of cards with different CEOs' faces on them as targets. So, I mean, there's definitely that kind of rhetoric, whether that leads to actual threats or is just people talking. It's hard to say, and that's again why that motivation point is important. But yeah, I think there's definitely trends and activities that happen that have an impact on all of this kind of thing.
Well, this has been great, and I think we left some time at the end for any of our listeners who'd like to ask questions. Is that right, Kathy?
Yes, we do have a few minutes. We'll give it a couple, see if people have questions. I'm also going to put in the chat ways that you can contact DarkOwl or Ascent if you want to reach out to us individually with any questions, or if you want to find out more about how we would apply to your use case.
Okay, great. We'll see if there's any questions, and if there are not, we'll call an end to the webinar. It's been a real pleasure, Brandon, chatting with you and with Aaron on a fairly important and very topical subject today. So
it's never a dull day in the life of a threat intelligence manager, cybersecurity company.
I think at the end, thinking about the geopolitical environment and how that affects individual companies and how it can not affect a company at all. But if you happen to be the CEO of a company that does business in the Middle East or does business, provides airplanes or defense contractor, it can get very, very thorny very, very quickly. So,
absolutely.
Kathy, I'm not seeing any questions. So I think we will say goodbye and thank you very much for everyone for joining us. Anything from you, Kathy?
No, I'm not seeing any either. Thank you, Mark, Brandon, and Aaron, for a very informative discussion. And we hope everyone enjoyed it. And we hope to see everyone at a future webinar.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Thanks.